Hi, guys. Okay, so we are on Acts 27. Oh, we're getting so close to the end. Okay, so it's page 1878. And in your Bibles, it even shows you a map on 1879, Paul's journey to Rome, because it's quite an interesting one. Um, anyway, we are on chapter 27. Here we go. When it was decided that we would sail to Italy, Paul and some other prisoners were handed over to a centurion named Julius, who belonged to the imperial regiment. We boarded a ship from Adramyttium, about to sail for ports along the coast of the province of Asia, and we put out to sea. Aristarchus, a Macedonian from Thessalonica, was with us. So notice how, once again, Luke is saying with us, which implies that Luke is there. So we know for sure that it's Paul, Luke, Aristarchus that are on this journey to Rome. The next day we landed at Sidon, and Julius, in kindness to Paul, allowed him to go to his friends so they might provide for his needs. From there we put out to sea again and passed to the lee of Cyprus because the winds were against us. When we had sailed across the open sea off the coast of Cilicia and Pamphylia, we landed at Myra in Lycia. There the centurion found an Alexandrian ship, sailing for Italy, and put us on board. We made slow headway for many days and had difficulty arriving off Cnidus. When the wind did not allow us to hold our course, we sailed to the lee of Crete, opposite of Salmone. We moved along the coast with difficulty and came to a place called Fair Havens, near the town of Lasea. Much time had been lost, and sailing had already become dangerous because by now it was after the Day of Atonement. So Paul warned them. Okay, now pay attention to this because this is really important. So Paul, he is a prisoner. However, he's also a man of God. So it says that Paul warned them. Now, if they were God-fearing men, then they would have listened to Paul, but they weren't. So they didn't listen to him. But this is what he tells them. This is verse 10. Men, I can see that our voyage is going to be disastrous and bring great loss to ship and cargo, and to our own lives also. But the centurion, instead of listening to what Paul said, followed the advice of the pilot and of the owner of the ship, which also makes sense too, because you think if someone is the pilot and someone is the owner of the ship, they would know what they're doing as well, because that's their job, right? So the centurion was in a tough place, and he certainly wasn't going to listen to a prisoner who's just being sent to Rome, right? But what he's about to find out is that this wasn't just any prisoner. This was a man of the one true God. Yeah, he should have listened. Okay, verse 12. Since the harbor was unstable to winter in, the majority decided that we should sail on, hoping to reach Phoenix and winter there. This was a harbor in Crete facing both southwest and northwest. And then it shows the picture down below where that is actually located, so you can kind of see the directions. All right. The storm. When a gentle south wind began to blow, they saw their opportunity, so they weighed anchor and sailed along the shore of Crete. Before very long, a wind of hurricane force, called the northeaster, swept down from the island. The ship was caught by the storm and could not head into the wind, so we gave way to it and were driven along. As we passed to the lee of the small island called Cauda, we were hardly able to make the lifeboat secure, so the men hoisted it aboard. Then they passed ropes under the ship itself to hold it together, because they were afraid they would run aground on the sandbars of Syrtis. They lowered the sea anchor and let the ship be driven along. Okay, so this storm was so violent and so powerful, they had no control of their ship. And so they decided if they just dropped an anchor, at least that anchor would hit the bottom, hopefully snag on something, and cause the ship to not just be kind of sloshing around in the sea so much. Verse 18, it says, "We took such a violent battering from the storm that the next day they began to throw the cargo overboard." So now what Paul had predicted is now coming true, right? They should have listened to Paul. He said that the cargo would have issues, the ship would have issues, and even the people on board would have issues. So Paul had said it before. So I wonder if now the centurion is like, should have listened, right? On the third day, they threw the ship's tackle overboard with their own hands. When neither sun nor stars appeared for many days, and the storm continued raging, we finally gave up all hope of being saved. So it doesn't say like the crew, the soldiers, the captain, like it doesn't say that. It says we. Okay, so Luke, the author, is saying we, which means he's talking about himself. He's talking about Paul. He's talking about Aristarchus. He's talking about the soldiers. He's talking about the centurion that's there. What's his name? Lysias? I already forgot it. Julius, not Lysias. Okay. So he's already talking about like all these people, they've given up. So this storm is so bad. They've thrown so many things overboard to kind of help with everything. They haven't seen sunlight in a while, right? And it says, we finally gave up all hope of being saved. So they've given in, thinking, we're going to die here. This is where we're going to die. We're going to die, right? And remember, the great thing about God is that he always gives us hope. That's what's so great about putting our trust in Jesus, is that there's hope there. That's such a great gift that he's given us when we're desperate, when things are rough. And if you guys have been in that situation in your life where things get so scary, the only thing that you really can have left is hope, right? I think about some of you guys and the things that you've already been through in your life. And there have been points in your life where literally all you've had is hope to get out of this season in your life, right? And you guys know who I'm talking about. And there are a lot of people who come to know the Lord at the very end of their life because they've lost everything. They're about to die. And then they start to get scared and realize, what if there is a God, right? What if I do have an opportunity to go to heaven and to see my loved ones and to know who this Jesus really is? And what does that do? That stirs hope within them, hope of a future, right? And so that's why a lot of people come to know the Lord at the very end stages of their life, because they realize, what if there is more, right? And it's kind of sad that they wait that long, because Jesus has such a wonderful life for us before like the end stages of our life, right? Like those of you who have actually been used by God, you know what I'm talking about. You know that feeling of being used by God, right? Being that vessel for him, what Paul has been for like so long, even though he's been tortured and stoned and pretty soon shipwrecked, spoiler alert. He's gone through so many different things, and he still chooses to be used by God because that brings such a closeness to Jesus that you just want more of. It's a little taste of heaven, right? And it's so worth it. So worth it. Okay, so it says that they've lost all hope of being saved, right? They're in a pretty low place right now. But listen to what happens. This is why God is so good, you guys. And this is why it's so important that when stuff gets rough, we cling to the Lord. Okay? So in verse 21, it says, It says, after they had gone a long time without food, okay, so not only have they lost all hope, they know they're going to die, they're also hangry, like they're so hungry. So it says, after they've gone a long time without food, Paul stood up before them and said, men, you should have taken my advice not to sail from Crete. Then you would have spared yourselves this damage and loss, right? So he's like, if you would have listened to me, this wouldn't have happened, right? Which he's right. Okay, but he's not just leaving them with, I told you so, right? That's not how Paul works. So listen to what it says next. It says, but now I urge you to keep up your courage, because not one of you will be lost. Only the ship will be destroyed. Last night, an angel of God to whom I belong and whom I serve stood beside me. So once again, this time God sent a messenger to Paul that stood right beside him. Could you imagine that feeling? Do you think he got like the chills, or he got really warm, or like just felt this like overall sense of peace while the storm was going on? Oy, sorry. Do you think that happened? Like, sorry. This like sense of peace, this craziness that happened with him, do you think that like when this angel of God stood right next to him, do you think he was just like, okay, and like then was able to like truly listen to what this angel of God said? So listen. So even though they were all in despair, now Paul has this great message for them, this message of hope, right? So he says, I'm going to read this part again. It's verse 23. It says, last night an angel of the God to whom I belong. So now Paul's making it very known. This is a different God than the false gods that everybody else believes in, okay? To whom I belong and whom I serve, stood beside me and said, do not be afraid, Paul. You must stand trial before Caesar. And God has graciously given you the lives of all who sail with you. So keep up your courage, men, for I have faith in God that it will happen just as he told me. Nevertheless, we must run aground on some island. Okay, so now Paul is saying, my God said that not one of you is going to die. All of you are going to be safe, right? So what does that do for all these men who were just thinking like, we're going to die. We're going to die, right? Even Paul lost hope until this messenger of God came and spoke to him and said, take courage. You're going to make it to Rome. All these people that are with you, they're going to be okay. They're going to make it too, right? That instills hope within them to allow them to keep going, right? It gives them something to look forward to. All right, so now it says the shipwreck, right? Obviously that was going to happen. All right, on the 14th night, we were still being driven across the Adriatic Sea. When about midnight, the sailors sensed they were approaching land. They took soundings and found that the water was 120 feet deep. A short time later, they took soundings again and found it was 90 feet deep. Fearing that we would be dashed against the rocks, they dropped 4 anchors from the stern and prayed for daylight. And here's where it gets sneaky, right? In an attempt to escape from the ship, the sailors let the lifeboat down into the sea, pretending they were going to lower some anchors from the bow. Right? So they're like, oh, we're just going to lower anchors from the bow. They were really lowering the lifeboat so they could sneak onto it and disappear and save themselves and let everybody else die. So luckily, the Spirit is within Paul, and Paul's like, nah, not happening, right? Then Paul said to the centurion and the soldiers, unless these men stay with the ship, you cannot be saved. So the soldiers cut the ropes that held the lifeboat and let it drift away. So there went their golden opportunity to escape. Verse 33, just before dawn, Paul urged them all to eat. For the last 14 days, he said, you have been in constant suspense and have gone without food. You haven't eaten anything. Could you guys imagine not eating food for 14 days and being in darkness for that long? I'm sure your mind plays tricks on you. And so Paul's trying to like talk some sense into them, right? Like, eat some food, you're going to need to, right? 34, now I urge you to take some food. You need it to survive. Not one of you will lose a single hair from his head. After he said this, he took some bread and gave thanks to God in front of them all. Then he broke it and began to eat. They were all encouraged and ate some food themselves. Altogether, there were 276 of us on board. When they had eaten as much as they wanted, they lightened the ship by throwing the grain into the sea. So think about that. There's chaos going around. There's no light. It's dark. There's a crazy storm going on. They just got rid of their lifeboat. And Paul's telling them to eat, but before they eat, what does he do in the midst of the chaos? He breaks the bread and he gives thanks to God. Like, he's like calm and chill in the middle of the storm and still has time to thank God, like, for food, right? Could you imagine doing that? And there's craziness going on everywhere and you're like, wait, let's thank God for the food, right? We take prayer for granted so much. Like, think about like before we go to lunch at school, right? Someone prays and it's like, oh, thanks for the food, let it nourish our body, amen, right? We don't realize, like, we're able to eat. Like, these men hadn't eaten in 14 days, right? And Paul's like, whoa, before we eat, let's thank God. Let's bring honor to him for the food that we have, right? That's intense. So before you go and eat food today, remember, as you're breaking bread, as you're preparing your food or getting your food ready to eat, thank God that you have food to eat, that it hasn't been 14 days since the last time you ate. And if it has, that's not okay. You need to eat. Kenna, you can't just eat donuts. You have to eat more than donuts, okay? But it's so cool that he's able to stop and give thanks to God, even in the midst of the chaos, right? And what did that do? Him being able to pray and talk to his God in front of these 276 people. It says they were all encouraged, right? People that had just lost all hope, now they're encouraged. Now they're eating. They're going to get some energy back, which they're going to need because they're going to have to swim to shore. All right. And then, so Paul prays to God, okay, and gives thanks. They eat food. They're encouraged. They have energy, right? And then look what happens next. Verse 39, it says, when daylight came, they finally see the sun. Thank you, Jesus. It had been a really long time since they had seen the sun, so I'm sure they were so excited to feel the sun on their faces. Okay. So when daylight came, they did not recognize the land, but they saw a bay with a sandy beach where they decided to run the ship aground if they could. Cutting loose the anchors, they left them in the sea and at the same time untied the ropes that held the rudders. Then they hoisted the foresail to the wind and made for the beach. But the ship struck a sandbar and ran aground, right? So that was what they were worried about. It happened anyway. But it's okay because God said he'd spare their lives. The bow struck fast and would not move, and the stern was broken to pieces by the pounding of the surf. The soldiers planned to kill the prisoners to prevent any of them from swimming away and escaping. So first of all, the sailors try to escape, and Paul's like, no, don't do that because then we won't all be saved. Now the soldiers are like, well, let's kill the prisoners so then we don't have to worry about them escaping because then we'll get in trouble, right? But the centurion, Julius, is now thinking back, okay, Paul told me that all this stuff was going to happen and I didn't listen. But now he said that we'd all be spared and none of us would lose our lives. So now is the time I need to listen, right? So it says that verse 43, but the centurion wanted to spare Paul's life and kept them from carrying out their plan. It sounds like the centurion is pretty curious about what Paul has to say, which is kind of neat, because hopefully that means he's pretty curious about what Paul has to say about Jesus too. This could have been the experience that this centurion needed to change his entire life, right? And probably the other people on board as well. He ordered those who could swim to jump overboard first and get to land. The rest were to get there on planks or on other pieces of the ship. In this way, everyone reached land safely. So, what God said was going to happen, happened, right? That's showing credibility not only to Paul, but to Paul's God, the one true God, right? So, what a testimony that is to all the people that were on that ship of who God is. Pretty cool, huh? Okay, hopefully this one recorded with sound. All right, love you guys. Bye. Maybe not.